There are a lot of things that Christians disagree about. That's why there are more than 200 different denominations. But there's one topic that may not even be on a lot of Christians' radar. I'm talking about the Big Bang Theory. No, not the TV show, the scientific theory. Many Christians think it's not possible to harmonize the Big Bang with the Bible. But is that true? Let's look at 5 reasons Christians should appreciate the Big Bang Theory. If Christians have thought about the Big Bang Theory at all, a lot of them may simply reject it out of hand because they think it contradicts the biblical record of creation in Genesis 1. But there are some very good reasons why Christians should embrace the Big Bang. The primary reason some Christians would reject the Big Bang is that they have been taught that the creation of the universe occurred 6,000 to 10,000 years ago during 6 days of one Earth week. That's what I believe for most of my life. The Big Bang Theory, on the other hand, says the matter that makes up the universe, as well as the natural laws which govern it, all began in one blinding flash of light about 13.8 billion years ago. Science only realized there was a singularity, the real name for the Big Bang, in the latter half of the 20th century after Edwin Hubble, for whom the telescope is named, determined that the universe is expanding. And if it's expanding, that means you can rewind the chronological tape and arrive at a beginning point when all the matter of the universe was in one tiny hot point of energy. But would it surprise you to know that a lot of scientists were not happy when the Big Bang Theory became the accepted paradigm? Before I go through the 5 reasons Christians should like the Big Bang Theory, I'm doing this YouTube channel to talk about the issues raised by my biblical historical fiction series, Age of the Kingdom. 3 novels are available now, which tell the stories of the united monarchy of Israel under King Saul, King David, and King Solomon from the viewpoint of fictional characters. I have a link in the description where you can find out more. So, what do the ancient kings of Israel have to do with the Big Bang Theory? King David wrote in Psalm 19, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky displays his handiwork." The Bible tells us to study the heavenly bodies because they teach us about God. The first reason Christians should like the Big Bang is that it comes from science but creates a real headache for atheism because of the word beginning. Christians tend to focus on the 13.8 billion years, but atheists resisted accepting the Big Bang because it confirmed the first 3 words of the Bible, in the beginning. Until the latter half of the 20th century, during my lifetime, science held to Aristotle's theory that the universe was eternal. So when Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth," atheist scientists had as much trouble with the word beginning as the word God. As far as they were concerned, there was no beginning to the universe. British physicist Sir Arthur Eddington said, "Philosophically, the notion of a beginning of the present order of nature is repugnant. I should like to find a genuine loophole." Albert Einstein came up with the cosmological constant in his theory of relativity to keep from having to recognize that the universe is expanding, because he knew that if the universe is expanding meant that there had to be a beginning to the universe. He later admitted that it was the biggest mistake of his scientific career. So a lot of scientists didn't want to accept the Big Bang as a theory of how the universe came to be. But the evidence from scientific disciplines like astronomy, physics, and mathematics convinced them, at least most of them. And if there was a Big Bang which began everything, what caused it to bang? That's the second reason Christians should embrace the Big Bang, namely, if the universe began, what or who caused it to begin? It's called the first cause argument for the existence of God, and the Big Bang Theory forces atheists to consider it. It's a serious problem for atheists because if nothing existed, why would anything begin to exist? If nothing existed and there was nobody to make anything exist, why would anything change? And yet, here we are talking about this, so we know once there was nothing, and now there's a great vast something, the universe, so there must have been something or someone who caused the universe to begin. That someone we call God. And if the universe began to exist, why is it governed by such fine-tuned laws of nature? That's the third reason Christians should pay attention to the Big Bang Theory. Why is the universe so precisely ordered that we are able to talk about natural laws that can be counted on to always work the same way? And those natural laws seem to have been preloaded when the Big Bang took place, unless there was a superintelligence that set it all up. This is the fine-tuning argument that the universe is so precisely calibrated that if anything was off by just a fraction of a percentage point, the whole thing wouldn't work. In fact, it's not too much to say that without the reliability of natural law, science itself couldn't exist, because doing science depends on things always reacting in predictable ways. Scientists never claim to have invented a natural law. They always say they discover natural laws already in operation. A few years ago, I went through a period of disillusionment during which I was an atheist or perhaps an agnostic for a few days, not knowing what I believed or if I believed anything. Then I looked outside our kitchen window and I saw the thermometer I had hung there so we could know the outside temperature without going outside. One look at that thermometer changed my direction back toward God. Why? Because that thermometer had a range of only about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, but I knew that the total range of possible temperatures was much greater. I live on the big island of Hawaii, where we have one and sometimes two active volcanoes. Lava is 2,000 degrees. The core temperature of the sun is 28 million degrees. On the other end of the spectrum, absolute zero is about minus 460 degrees or 273 degrees Celsius. I didn't know anything about the fine-tuning argument then, but since then I've learned that there are no fewer than 300 parameters which must be exactly calibrated for the universe to exist and for life to exist on Earth. For example, if the force of gravity changed by 1% downward, we might not immediately feel anything, but the tectonic plates of the Earth would eventually move, causing widespread earthquakes, the collapse of buildings, and resulting the death of millions, if not billions, of people. But that's only the beginning. Now that the gravitational pull of the moon is lessened, the Earth would experience tsunamis that will kill many more, and eventually the Earth would move away from the sun and the overall temperature of the Earth would fall until life could no longer continue. And that's with just a 1% drop in the force of gravity. But if gravity increased, let's say 5%, the results would be catastrophic. Depending on who you ask, this disaster would make it almost impossible for us to move and cause the interior of the Earth to collapse, while the Earth moved closer to the sun, burning up all crops and ending life as we know it in the warmer areas. What or who set that exact parameter of the force of gravity so the heavenly bodies we call the universe would be as stable as they are? That's another proof of the existence of a superintelligence who set it all up in the beginning, God. Also, one of the four major forces in physics and chemistry is the strong nuclear force. It's what causes neutrons and protons to hold together in the nucleus of atoms. If the strong nuclear force was just 5% weaker, no atoms of any element could hold together, except hydrogen, which consists of just one proton and one electron. Any more complex atom would dissipate. Everything in the universe, including you and me, lives on a knife's edge, where exact parameters keep us from falling off one way or the other. The fourth reason Christians should pay attention to the Big Bang relates to the timing. Christians who are accustomed to thinking of the Earth as less than 10,000 years old think 14 billion years is a long time. But according to the Big Bang theory, the bulk of that time was required to form the stars and planets. Scientists believe the first single-celled life appeared only 3.5 billion years ago. When you consider what science teaches about the evolution of life, 3.5 billion years is not nearly enough time for natural selection to go down countless blind alleys until it solves the insurmountable problem of building the first living cell, much less continuing on until it develops the complex body plans of the higher animals, not to mention intelligent, self-aware human beings. When Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, he believed, like Aristotle did, that the universe was eternal, so there was an infinite amount of time for evolution to work. But he knew nothing about the incredible complexity of the cell, with its chemical coding of DNA and RNA and the complex protein factories. He also knew nothing about genetics and the structural roadblocks that branch of science throws up in front of the evolution from one type of organism to another. The Big Bang Theory shows there was not enough time for even what Darwin understood to happen through unguided evolution. For this reason, the Big Bang Theory may yet sound the death knell of the theory of evolution regarding the origin of the first life, because it severely limits the amount of time available. The fifth reason concerns the Big Bang as evidence of the existence of God as he is depicted in the Bible. Unlike other ancient religions, Genesis does not picture God as part of creation. Rather, he existed before the beginning, and he is outside of space, time, matter, and energy, independent from his creation. The beginning required by the Big Bang means that God existed apart from the universe before the Big Bang and caused it to happen, just like he's presented in the Bible. The reason many Christians resist the Big Bang relates to the interpretation of Genesis 1, which does indeed say God had 6 days in a creation week. However, just a small adjustment in the way we understand the first 2 verses of the Bible to allow for the Big Bang. The Big Bang is all about how the non-biotic universe, space, time, energy, and matter came to be. On the other hand, Genesis 1 is all about the creation of life on Earth. But where does Genesis describe the creation of the planet Earth itself? On which day of creation week is the Earth created? In verse 2 of Genesis 1, the earth is already there, an empty and chaotic wilderness of never-ending ocean, with the Spirit of God hovering above the waters. On day 2 of creation, God separates the waters that are on the earth, but it still doesn't say he created the earth on that day. On day 3, God calls forth dry land out of the global ocean, but that's not when the planet is created. It's incredible to me that I had to live more than 60 years before I realized that Genesis 1 doesn't describe the creation of planet Earth. That highlights a blind spot among Christians when we read the first chapter of the Bible. If we see verse 1, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth," as referring to the creation of all non-living parts of the universe, the stars and planets, in other words, the mineral as opposed to animal or vegetable, it fits nicely with the Big Bang. Then verse 2 shows God focusing on the planet he has chosen to host the living organisms. So in Genesis 1, God is getting the lifeless planet ready, then creating life on Earth through the 6 days of creation. The thing is, creation of the universe, including planet Earth and the creation of life, doesn't have to be all one package. It appears from the first 3 verses of Genesis that they were separate events. Once the inorganic stars and planets were ready, God created organic life on Earth, and that's what the 6 days are about. To say it another way, the inorganic part of the universe is a different subject from life on Earth. But, what about the evening and morning statement for each of the days, my young Earth creationist friends will say? Doesn't that demand that the 6 days were 24-hour days of one Earth week? And what about the 4th day that records the creation of the sun, moon, and stars? Doesn't that require us to say the entire universe was created within that 6 days? Maybe, but just as the question of creation of the mineral universe is separate from the creation of life, so the question of how long the creation of life took is a separate question as well. Perhaps God did it in 6 literal days, or perhaps those days are a metaphor for periods of time. As early as the 2nd century AD, Christians were proposing various theories, including the days as metaphor for longer periods. It's not new. I don't have time to go into all the aspects of this, but remember that the Bible is made up of different kinds of literature, including poetry and metaphor, as well as history and prophecy. I maintain that Genesis 1 is poetry, and the repeated refrain, God saw what he had made and it was good, and the evening and morning were the nth day, is what makes it poetry. But that's not all that makes me think there is more to Genesis 1 than the recounting of facts. Again, it took me many years to see this. I'm talking about the 3 couplets that are present in Genesis 1. Day 1, let there be light, matches day 4, sun, moon, and stars. Day 2, the waters above and beneath, matches day 5, creation of birds and fish, which inhabit the waters above and beneath. Day 3, dry land and vegetation, matches day 6, creation of land animals and humankind, which live on the dry land and eat the vegetation. To take that a step further, on day 3 and day 6, God speaks twice. On all other days, he speaks just once. So that's another thing showing that Genesis 1 is not a historical document exclusively, but a poem and may have metaphorical elements. If we accept the couplet idea, it could explain why the sun, moon, and stars are put on day 4, so it matches day 1. Another consideration is that the sun, moon, and stars were gods in the ancient world, so Genesis 1 could be an apologetic for monotheism, demoting the heavenly bodies and putting them on day 4 instead of higher in the sequence. Also, Genesis 1's day 4 doesn't actually name the sun and moon. It just says lights to rule the day and night, another way of demoting the pagan gods of sun and moon. So whether the 6 days of creation in Genesis 1 were literal 24-hour days as opposed to epochs of time is really neither here nor there. The important thing is that the Big Bang Theory is possibly the best thing to come out of science to prove the existence of God as creator, and we as Christians do well to pay attention. That's all for now. Please like and subscribe if you like this content. See you next time.